the battle for Noricum is such a disaster.
The Romans were in the end saved from being pushed over the cliff into the hell of utter destruction only by a giant storm, lightning, thunder, and rain.
Knocked from his horse, Carbo struggles to flee from the deadly chaos. He escapes the battle only to commit suicide, for he has disgraced himself and Rome in the eyes of the gods.
God saved the Romans, but only just, and only after many, many had been killed. What did that mean? It meant the gods were unhappy at the way the Romans behaved.
And yet the Romans cling to the notion that only the aristocrats can lead them to victory.
The Romans believed that old meant good, new meant dangerous. So they, for their politicians and their leaders, they preferred people with a long, distinguished family history.
Over the next decade, a string of nobles, all armed with more arrogance than skill, lead armies north to protect Rome's province in Gaul. In each instance, the barbarians completely rout Rome's heralded legions.
The Romans had their particular formal ways of fighting. If we think of the beginning of the film Gladiator, that's a perfect representation of how Rome liked to fight. Take hours to set up everything in the battle order and then launch the attack.
In contrast, the barbarians' counterattack is unpredictable and devastating to the Roman lines.
You have these lines of men, and if the person next to you goes down, the person behind will step into that gap. And death would be much, much more intimate.
The death toll is staggering. At Arausio alone, 80,000 Romans are massacred in a single afternoon.
When an army lost its cohesiveness, then the men were literally like fish in a barrel to be picked off at leisure by the other side. So when a side has been defeated, then the victors, they just slaughter them one by one, with no danger to the people doing the slaughtering. It's not a battle anymore, it's a mass execution.
By 105 BC, the Cimbri and their allies desire much more than Roman blood and booty. Some members of the clan want to set down roots.
They were farming peoples, they engaged in trade, they lived in small villages. People were growing wheat and barley, rye, oats, millet, a whole variety of different kinds of cereals. They were raising lentils and peas and beans and other kinds of garden crops. Cattle were extremely important. Pigs, sheep, and goat were all being raised.
This new domesticity alarms the Romans. To their minds, the only thing more threatening than a barbarian warrior is a barbarian woman.
The presence of women is a standard Roman way of communicating that this is an invasion for settlement. In other words, this is a group that's coming in to significantly alter the way we live, to threaten our basic values. If it's just a raid, it's just a bunch of teenage guys, we can deal with that. But see, when we throw women into the description, we have the migratory feature, and there it's a permanency. It requires a sterner and long-term solution.
It requires a general who can beat the barbarians back once and for all. The hero Rome so desperately needs emerges on another hotly contested borderland, nearly 1,000 miles away, in Numidia, part of present-day Algeria. For 8 long years, the Romans have tasted only defeat here, until now. The name of their savior is Marius. With guts and cunning, he crushes the Numidian armies of the rogue king Jugurtha.
needed great soldiers, and Marius was the greatest Rome had yet seen. Both because he was a great commander, Marius could pick the right time and the right place for a battle, but also because he won his soldiers' loyalty and affection by getting down and digging ditches with them, by eating the same rough food, by being in better shape than even they were, and they were the best conditioned soldiers in the world.
He comes by his common touch naturally, for Marius is no aristocrat. Still, he speaks of his humble background with pride.
I cannot point to my ancestors, but I can show medals and other military honors, to say nothing of the scars on my body, all of them in front. These are my title of nobility.
Now, as the northern barbarians close in, the Romans turn to Marius, their last and best hope. At the end of the 2nd century BC, a violent barbarian tribe, the Cimbri, along with their allies the Teutones and Ambrones, lay waste to the northern frontier. A horrified Rome turns to its greatest general and new consul, Marius.
He's a proven military commander, and you don't want to fool around when you have Teutones and Cimbri who have defeated army after army. You really want to take care of the problem urgently, and so you want to send a capable leader out on the field.
But even the great Marius cannot lead without men to follow him. Devastated by a decade of war, Rome faces critical troop shortages.
If you have as many men lost to the German tribes in 113 and 109 and 107 and 106 and 105, as the Romans did, that's going to traumatize Roman society pretty severely.
Despite a vigorous recruitment campaign, Marius cannot find enough qualified men, landholders who are willing to serve.
To be in the Roman army in the High Republic, you had to have a property qualification. You had to be a person of means, and this causes some problems for the Roman army because there's a problem with manpower.
Marius's solution is as simple as it is radical. He sends his recruiters out to seek soldiers among the landless poor.
You don't have to be a property holder to be a Roman citizen, so why should you have to be a property owner to be a legionnaire? Many people wish to be soldiers. It's a good job, and it's probably an exciting job. Opportunities for booty, wine, women, and song, chance to see the world at government expense, etc. The same things that we see on our recruitment posters.
Marius said anybody can be in the army. This then gave the Romans a much greater pool of men on which to draw to strengthen their legions, because in Roman society there were many, many, many more poor than there were middle class.
The old guard judges recruits by their income. Marius judges his by their fighting potential. Stand up against a legionary and you can stand up to the barbarians.
By extending the search for legionnaires down into the proletariat, what that rather quickly does is it makes the ordinary soldier even more dependent upon the success of the commander. The general is expected to provide for his men and to provide for them as soon as he can, and to be generous.
Lured by the promise of wealth, a new breed of Roman soldier marches to war. Marius pledges to give them all the tools and skills they need.
I will teach you to strike down an enemy. Fear nothing but disgrace, to sleep on bare ground and work hard on an empty stomach.
In 104 BC, Marius and his army set off for Gaul to meet the Cimbri. In a stroke of good fortune for the Romans, the barbarians choose that very moment to leave Gaul and raid Hispania instead. It is a tactical mistake that buys Marius valuable time. Marius molds his new army from the ground up. He not only hardens them to the rigors of a soldier's life, he makes them love it.
Marius made lots of innovations in the army. For example, he gave each legion an eagle, a silver eagle, as its standard. He trained his men to carry what they needed on campaign so they could move faster. But he weighed them down so much that they called themselves Marius's mules. Marius didn't need pack animals for his army to go on campaign. He already had his mules, and they only had 2 legs.
But they were more effective. They were more flexible. And it's the flexibility of the legions that is enhanced by Marius's military reforms, including the standardization of equipment.
Well-equipped and unified in spirit, Marius's mules are transformed, but untested. 2 years pass with no sign of the barbarians. Still, the fear they inspire remains. Panicked, the Romans ignore their own ancient traditions about term limits and re-elect Marius consul, the chief magistrate of war.
I think part of the problem is to deal with the threat from the north, you have to give Marius this extraordinary command where in 104, 103, 102, 101, 100, he's consul. Boom, 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 boom.
At last, in 102 BC, the Phantom Menace becomes real. The Cimbri, Teutones, and Ambrones sweep out of the north and west on a collision course with Rome. Marius builds a fortress near Arausio. He sends another army to guard Noricum. For above all else, the Alpine passes into Italy must be protected. Within weeks, half of the horde, the Teutones and Ambrones, swarm around Marius's fort, a terrifying sight according to Plutarch.
Their numbers appeared to be infinite. They were hideous to look at. Their speech and their shouting were unlike anything that anyone had ever heard before.
And yet Marius forces his men to look and learn.
Marius was a brilliant military man. He understood the life and the thoughts and the psychology of a soldier. What Marius gave to the Roman Republic was confidence that Romans could defeat the fiercest barbarians in the world.
The fortress holds. The Teutones and Ambrones cannot pass. 150,000 strong, they head south, seeking another Alpine pass. The Romans pursue them at a distance, in no hurry to engage till the right time and place. For Marius has already picked out the perfect battlefield, where he will at last unleash the power of his unconventional army. In 102 BC, hundreds of thousands of barbarians swarmed towards Italy. The great Roman general Marius pursues the Teutones and the Ambrones as they seek a pass over the Alps. He moves his troops from his fortress at Arausio to Aquae Sextiae, modern-day Aix-en-Provence, France. There, Marius orders his men to set up camp. He chooses his position carefully.
The Roman camp is a singular military piece of machinery. It would preferably be on high ground in order to see any kind of enemy maneuvers. It's going to be laid out on a grid pattern. You're going to surround it with a deep ditch, and you're going to have a rampart dug heaped up above that ditch, what's known as an agger, and everyone would have their place.
There is one more feature that most camps have, but this particular camp is lacking. Classical biographer Plutarch.
Marius chose a place that was not very well supplied with water. They said he did this deliberately so as to encourage his soldiers to fight. When people complained they were thirsty, Marius pointed to a river running close by the barbarian camp. "There is some drinking water for you," he said, "but you have to pay for it with blood."
On the banks of the Rhone River, settled side by side in two great camps, the Ambrones and Teutones have plenty of fresh drinking water.